Hello, Pauper fans. This is Mathonical, and this is round one of the Pauper Challenge from October 29th, and we're going to be playing some Orzhov Pestilence. Looking at our opening hand, this is one of those keeps that you could keep if you knew your opponent was going to be playing some creatures that you wanted to kill in turns 1 or 2. So after looking at this opening hand, I did look up my opponent, and I saw that they were very likely on some sort of blue-black deck. Possibly blue-black teachings, and given that this is not a keepable hand, this would be terrible in that matchup, so I went ahead and mulliganed it. So we got this hand. This is a keepable hand. 4 mana source, Palace Sentinels is exactly what we want in a control matchup, and at least a couple things to play early. Bojuka Bog is something that could be useful in the matchup, but at the same time we do have 4 lands, so I don't remember if we kept it or not. We'll take a quick look. But yes, we put it on the bottom. I do remember debating that it is something that you could keep, but basically if you think that their graveyard is going to be useful, it'd be useful, but 4 mana is already what we want. We can play everything in our deck, so we don't necessarily need it. So let's go ahead and start going through this. We're just going to get ourselves some life gain going on. We have the option of playing the Ash Bear next turn if we wanted to get the core Skyfisher down, but that is not likely. It's going to be a game about trying to get this Palace Sentinel down as early as possible. If they're going to be representing any kind of counterspell that could get rid of it, then we're not going to just play it out there, because this is basically our way of winning. And since basically there was an opportunity to play it, but they'd have to have Remove Soul or something, which their list I believe does run, so I chose not to do it there. I'm going to start running them out there, because now I've got multiple turn 4 plays I want to go with. Turns out they didn't have a counterspell, so we did get the Monarch. They are able to take it back, but we're not too concerned, since we're able to just get down another one. And now they need to have another removal spell to get rid of this one as well. There was the option of playing something else to start with, but this is probably the best option. Also, being able to discard there means we can get rid of the Prismatic Strands, so that way if they do kill our guy like here, we can flash it back to give ourselves pro-blue. That way we won't lose the Monarch this turn. And this also means that with what's in our hand, we should be able to play down multiple guys and not have to worry about losing the Monarch here. Of course, there is the argument, if our opponent is on the blue-black teachings deck, I was considering possibly just letting them have the Monarch and keep it. There's a good chance that they'd be able to deck themselves and we'd win that way, but since it's still very early in the game, I feel like it's still better to try and go for the win through conventional means. So we're going to continue to fight for the Monarchy here, just because if we can get a hold of it, we can very easily win with just sheer card advantage. We're trying to put down as many threats as possible, since we do want to get this Monarchy back, and we want them to try and remove all of our guys. Turns out they were not able to remove everything, so we're going to go ahead and attack, and at the end of the turn we're going to disfigure that Augur, just to make sure that's one less creature we have to worry about. We've got a lot of things to play here. Turns out they did end up using the Remove Soul on the core Skyfisher. I guess they didn't want us to get some additional advantage. Here, we're actually in a good spot because the Evercard's Justice, our Prismatic Strands can completely counter that, meaning we have to keep our creatures on the board, steal back the Monarchy, and now we have the flashback potential of the Prismatic Strands at some point in the future. We also get to start getting our other things online, like our core Skyfisher, drawing additional cards. We've got a Guardian to get down, and we've got a lot of clues on the battlefield. So over the course of the game, we're going to be able to draw a lot of cards, and our game plan at this point, since our opponent gave us the opening, is to just win with sheer card advantage. Guardian is not the greatest in this matchup, since they do have a lot of sacrifice effects, so we're going to have to try and keep enough creatures on the board to play around like Evercard's Justice plus a sack effect, but at the same time, even if we did lose everything, it's not the end of the world. Since we're drawing so many cards, we'd be able to very quickly just play additional creatures. Our biggest concern here is if they're able to somehow stabilize the board and get the Curse online, where the mill plan becomes a real threat. Currently, they have not been able to get that online, so we're not too worried, but if they were ever able to resolve it and then remove our creatures, it would be a pretty bad situation. So right now we've got to try and cash in as many cards as we can, and get down some more threats. We want to try and close out this game. Pestilence, while it may not look like the best card in this matchup, it does present a way of getting in damage that doesn't rely on attacking or having a creature on the board after their turn. So it is actually really good to have it. We're going to cash in the rest of the Prismatic Strands to counter the Evercard's Justice. We just want to try and keep as many creatures on the battlefield as possible to get in for damage. And while our removal is not that great in this matchup, it does allow us to get in for a little extra damage, which is useful. And we're going to go ahead and play the Pestilence here, just because, as I mentioned, it's a way of getting in non-combat damage. We already know that they want to play Evercard's Justice to try and remove our creatures, and this just provides us another way to get a little extra damage in. So they go ahead and use the Evercard's Justice. They're going to make us sack one of our creatures. This is all fine. And then we lose all of our creatures. That's no problem. We're just going to end up cashing in 3 damage off of this Pestilence and continue to draw additional cards over the course of the game, trying to get down a bit more pressure. If we get additional, like another Pestilence off the top would win us the game here. Unfortunately, we did not get it. I could draw a couple more cards looking for it. Still didn't manage to find it, so we'll just run out a creature. And now we're just looking for exactly that card, a Pestilence, to try and end the game. Now we have to find some opportunity to resolve it. It's very likely that our opponent will have some counter spells, seeing as they have 4 cards in hand and have only been casting removal spells. So, yeah, we're going to try and run one out there. It actually does end up sticking, since they only had 1 blue available. Wasn't really worried about counter spell here. So we're able to resolve it and get in the last couple damage with the Pestilence. So this game ended up working in our favor, even though we did have to mulligan to 6, but the mulligan arguably did help us quite a bit since our initial opening hand was pretty bad against them. We'll take a quick look at the sideboard. I just realized I didn't actually take a screenshot. I'll grab it for the next one. But you can see I took out an Aven Rift Watcher. I took out a bunch of our removal. Since it's not going to be all that helpful in this matchup, they're basically just playing Augur. There's a chance that they might pull in some Gurmag Anglers to try and close out the game quicker, but the Doomblades and Disfigures don't do anything there. I did leave in the Sacrifice effects, since that can still remove the Anglers, and it does get rid of the Augurs. We would like them to have no creatures, so that we can keep the Monarchy. We did bring in the other Palace Sentinel, because we want to get that Monarch as quickly as possible. We took out some of the Prismatic Strands. They don't help us much here. We also took out the Wall of Hope. And we brought in the entire Duress package, Land Destruction. We want to try and keep their lands down as much as possible, just so they don't have a mana advantage over us. We also brought in the Raven's Crime. That is a very important card in this matchup, since it allows us to turn all of our lands into additional discard for our opponent. And we also brought in the 2 Relic of Progenitus, because we need to just try and chew through his graveyard. He's got a couple things that can use his graveyard. It's also a way of getting a redraw off of otherwise what would have been a dead card. Also took out a Guardian Guild Pact. As I mentioned in the previous game, it isn't that great when they have a lot of sacrifice effects, so it just turns out to be like a 4-cost guy. So in general, that was the sideboard plan. So let's pull up our opening hand. Unfortunately, this is not a keepable hand. Even though it does have the Palace Sentinels, we really do need to make sure we're hitting our land drops, and having 4 drops with 1 land is not that good. So we're going to go ahead and shift that back. This hand is much, much better. We have 3 mana source. We've got the Duress to pick apart a bit of their hand, Night's Whispers to undo the mulligan, and the Palace Sentinel, which is the card we're mainly looking for. That'll allow us to get ahead in the card advantage, and Pestilence is nice for closing out the game at some other point. Duress on top is also really good. We would like more of that effect, so go ahead and keep that on top. And let's get into it. They start on the Radiant Fountain again. That's fine. And they're just developing their mana. That was to be expected. Drawing the Ash Baron there was fairly nice. That means we get to cycle it and get our untapped black source to start duressing. We take the Mystical Teachings out of their hand. There was the option of taking like the Repeal, but that's fine. And we're not too worried about losing some of our creatures. We expect to be losing creatures over the course of the game. So we duress again. We play our bounce land, and now that we have this Raven's Crime, that is actually a really nice thing to have. Since we were reasonably sure that they didn't have a counterspell in hand since we had seen their hand, we go ahead and play the Palace Sentinels. We know that the Innocent Blend is coming, but we had already taken the repeal, so that way they just don't get additional draws into their deck. Another Duress finds an Evercar's Justice, and at this point they do not have much in hand. So we're already looking pretty good. They don't have any creatures to take this Monarchy back. We've got removal to deal with any creatures they may play. And we're going to try and draw additional cards, but they end up having a negate. That's not too bad. Choking Sands means we can try and limit their mana options so they can't play too much in a turn later on. We go ahead and try and cast it, and they flash back their Mystical Teachings, which is to be expected. They end up getting another Mystical Teachings. They're basically just trying to find some ways of getting additional cards to try and combat our Monarchy. Raven's Crime, we're just going to cash in some of our additional lands to reduce the number of cards in their hand. Even if we're getting just lands or things like that, it's no big deal. We do want to keep their land count at a minimum. They end up discarding a complete discard anyway, which is great. It means that's one less removal spell and more of our creatures get to stick. They do have some counter magic. That's no problem. We're just going to keep riding our card advantage, and we don't mind trading one for one at this point. We would like to draw additional lands, because we have multiple uses for them. We can use Raven's Crime, or we can try and play additional things. So in this case, we're going to play our Core Skyfisher, bouncing a land, so we have 4 mana to play a Palace Sentinels just to get multiple threats down at one time. Our opponent is basically doing what they do, hitting their land drops, trying to get some additional advantage with Mystical Teachings. Augur of Bolus, they do have a murder now, but we're not too concerned about that. We try to Chainer's Edict their creature. They end up thinking that was good enough to counterspell, which I don't really mind. Attacking here is incentivizing them to use their murder on our Palace Sentinels, but the main plan is to use Prismatic Strands to prevent their creature from attacking. I go ahead and cast it before the creature is removed, just in case they had a counterspell for it. If the creature was removed and they countered it, they would be able to steal the Monarchy. Turns out they still had a counterspell and various other things, so we weren't able to kill their creature, and they were able to take the Monarchy back. Here I go ahead and cast the Choking Sands because I'm trying to bait out a counterspell before playing the Palace Sentinel. Turns out they just use their Mystical Teachings to get another counterspell, so that's not a good time to run at the Palace Sentinel. We're just going to run out a bunch of creatures, make them discard a little bit. They're continuing to remove all of our creatures. That's not a big concern just yet. And they do get the curse. This is the part that that can be a problem. Now we're basically on a clock. It is a bit risky to take the Monarchy back, but I feel like since we have multiple Pestilences in hand, that there's a good opportunity for us to win this game through damage using the Pestilence. Our opponent does get a Crypt Incursion, so we do have to be careful about how much life they're going to gain from that. And if possible, we do want to try and hit that with the Raven's Crime before they have an opportunity to cast it. So we're going to use our Pestilence right now to wipe out all of their blockers and try and get in for some damage. And drawing additional cards, playing additional creatures. Something you can do when playing the Core Skyfisher, if you really need to keep your Pestilence, you can always bounce it, but since we have additional Pestilence in hand, that isn't really necessary. We also have this Crypt Rat that can basically be a lot of direct damage at some point. They're flashing back Chainer's Edict, that's fine. And we're just going to keep chipping in for some damage when we can. Here I'm using Pestilence to chip in an extra 3 damage before casting our Thraben Inspector, and using the Raven's Crime as well, which managed to get the Crypt Incursion, so this way they can't gain a bunch of life. I feel like they should have cashed it in at some earlier turn knowing that we have discard, but they ended up not doing that. We want to make sure they have no cards in hand before playing spells or anything else. And we also had a Bojuka Bog that we wanted to exile their graveyard with, so now they have no graveyard to play with. We only Pestilence for 1 this turn because we'd like to keep our Thraben Inspector, and they didn't draw anything that turn, so we were going to be able to get in for 3 damage and then Pestilence them for quite a bit. So they knew that the game was over at this point and conceded. So thank you for joining me for round 1, and I'll see you in round 2.